Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall. During a long and varied brewing career, Charlie Cole dreamed of owning his own brewery. When he finally got the chance, the beer was great, but little else went according to plan. This episode tells his story. And we'll get into it all in a moment. But first, please go visit allaboutbeer.com for original articles, reviews, news, insight, and podcasts. You can listen to shows like Beer Travelers, Brewer to Brewer, and the All About Beer podcast by simply searching All About Beer wherever you listen to shows. This show and all the work we do is supported by you. You can visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer to help keep the content fresh. And if you'd like to learn more about advertising on the show, please email info@allaboutbeer.com. Speaking of that, are you thinking about cutting back on alcohol this January? If so, check out Athletic Brewing Company, America's leading non-alcoholic craft brewer. Athletic makes wide selection of near beers, including IPAs, Goldens, Darks, light brews, and more. Give dry a try this month with Athletic. And new Athletic customers can receive 20% off of their first order of 2 six-packs or more when they visit athleticbrewing.com and use the code AAB20 at checkout by March 31st, 2023. Thanks to Athletic for sponsoring this episode. From a marketing beginning to eventual homebrewing and then a professional career that had him working for one of the best-known German brewers, then to small outfits where his creativity could flourish, Charlie Cole has been dedicated to craft beer. When the opportunity came along to get involved with Blue Cat, an Illinois brewing institution going back to the 1990s, he jumped at the chance. He's a believer in tradition and forward momentum, but also of honoring location and history, but never settling for the status quo. For almost 2 years now, as brewer and general manager, he's been working to keep the brewery and restaurant moving in a positive way. But a series of factors, including many that are familiar to other brewery owners, have made it a tough road to walk. At the end of 2022, he had to close, something he hopes is temporary. Here's our conversation. What drew you to a professional career in beer in the first place?
I think I did some school in Southern California, like fresh out of high school, and they were just so far advanced in the world of craft beer. Even growing up in St. Louis and making that change to the West Coast, and the way all the branding was with the IPAs and the battle for having the most bitter IPA, and all the great names and imagery that was going along with it. Also reminded me of just like, punk rock bands and everything of how they market and brand themselves. So I was definitely more drawn into the marketing and branding side of the business, and thought that's what I was going to end up doing. Was I wanted to design beer labels and come up with the cool names and how to come up with promotions to sell them. I kind of ended up on the brewing side out of necessity of work.
You're telling me creativity doesn't pay the bills?
No, especially in small American independent craft breweries, they just you got to do multiple hats, and if you're really good at that side of things, then they just let you do it.
I want to just talk about that for a minute or two, because with 9,500 breweries now in the country, there is a need for creativity outside of the beer itself, for things to stand out on shelves, for campaigns to bring people in or encourage them to actually buy something off the shelves. Early on, what did you see that worked? And then where do you see things these days?
Yeah, definitely an evolution. When I first started getting into craft beer, everything was in bottles. Most craft breweries weren't doing cans yet. So, the earlier things that really grabbed my eye as a consumer was Stone and St. Archer, when they had the painted on bottles, and New Belgium also, and had those screen printed labels.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, that's totally different. They put some money into it. Like if the product inside is anywhere as valuable as the outside of that bottle, then It's got to be good stuff. So I remember when that used to catch my eye, and now you never see anything like that anymore. Most common package is the 16-ounce can. So I remember some of the first ones that really caught my eye and was like, wow, they're doing things completely different. Pipeworks in Chicago just had the most extreme off the wall, just animated art of Ninja versus Unicorn and like all these weird things.
And great names
that
too.
went with it.
Yeah. Names that really stood out in a fun way.
Right. Yeah. Fantastic product. Like once that caught your eye to get it off the shelf and then backing it up with great liquid inside, definitely helped.
So as you've gone through, various brewing jobs then, how did that marketing side of things, how did that storytelling side of things inform you as a brewer? Because I imagine that part of your career has never left you. But then when you started focusing on actually making beer, did that previous job, that previous life, off the brew deck inform your time on it?
Yeah, definitely. When I first even started home brewing, was living at this bachelor pad with two other guys, and they had already been home brewing previously, and they taught me how to home brew. And I was like, man, you guys are making great beer. Like I could make this into a business. We could, you guys brew and I'll do all the business side. I'll do all the marketing, branding. I'll come up with the names. I see what all of these awesome breweries around the country are doing. Beer on Instagram was like extremely blowing up that point. And I was pretty good at social media marketing. So I was like, we can make a good run of this. So I loved that side of it and ended up getting us signed up for beer festivals. I don't know if we were supposed to be on those beer festivals. We just had a good enough brand that people thought we were an actual brewery, even though we were just home brewing in our garage. But yeah, I got into starting doing these festivals and networking events and going to co-op spaces for, panels and things and serving our beer for free. And ended up just doing too many for them to be able to keep up brewing 5 gallons in the garage at a time. So I ended up starting to brew more because of that side of things, and then just fell in love with the craft that way. I was like, wow, this is a completely different way of being able to express myself. And then if I can also express myself in these recipes, like I already have like a list of names of beers that I've always wanted to brew, but didn't know what style to put towards it. I could actually come up with a recipe now, starting with a name or starting with an image or some kind of label, and then build a beer around it. So being able to work both sides was awesome. From the beginning of my career, the first brewery that I started working in professionally was a international chain, German brewery, and so I got to get side of that. You can name it, right? Yeah, so it was at Hofbrau. Okay. They had just opened up a location in the St. Louis area. It was their largest one. So yeah, made 3 different kinds of German lager and a Hefeweizen, and that's all we got to brew. And I got to do nothing on the marketing side. So the whole time
brewing on those systems, like I remember the Vegas one, there was the one in Pittsburgh, that I visited. I mean, the beer was always excellent. And in that Hofbrau tradition, I imagine that's gotta be, baptism by fire.
It was the most baptism by fire of any brewer that I've ever known. I was in there from day one, from the build out. I just got the German brewmaster from Munich found me on a St. Louis home brewers group on Facebook. That's how I found out about the job and went through the whole interview process and somehow got picked with no formal education or experience. And I got thrown in there, and
that's ballsy on your part to one, apply for that, but 2, for them to take the chance on you.
Yeah, it was crazy that I got the job, especially knowing I knew the other 2 people that made it to the top 3 of the interviews, because they had a group interview together, which is really strange. But so I knew that they had already had way. Do
you get to pick your weapons at the door? How does that work?
I think I just lowballed them of what I was willing to work for. I think they were just like, well, he's cheap. Let's give it a shot.
He can be taught. Yeah.
Yep. So yeah, I got in there, and I think we only brewed 2 or 3 batches, and then the brewmaster got deported. the franchise owners of that location didn't do the visa process correctly, and they sent him back. So I had never brewed professionally on a brew system before. It was a 20 hectoliter system that was built in Austria. All the programming was done by a Russian who translated it into English or into German, and nothing was in English. Not a single thing on that system was in English. And all of the buttons were German acronyms of words. So I couldn't even just Google the names of these buttons because they weren't even the full word. And yeah, the brewmaster, when he got deported, he actually went to Mexico, to Monterrey. And so I'm FaceTiming him doing my first professional brew by myself on this German system, making the hardest style of beer in the world, a Helles lager, to international German standards. And I'm FaceTiming him the whole time, and he's poolside in swim trunks with a cooler full of beer, teaching me how to use this brew system for the first time.
What was the old show where the celebrity would come out? Punked. I feel like that's got to be an episode.
Absolutely.
Or like an episode-esque.
It felt like that every minute of every day, because it's one of those showcase breweries where the brew deck's in the middle of the beer hall, just right behind the bar. Not even
was it open for service at that point? So were you doing this in front of people?
We had just had like our grand opening. Yeah, all of the beer that he made that I just got to assist on was all brewed pre-opening, and then as soon as we opened, he got sent out. So I'm making lagers on this system, having no experience, going from 5 gallons in my garage to 20 hectoliters automated brew system. And right in the middle of lunch with just 80 people staring at you, and you push the wrong button and something clanks and all of the pipes are shaking above you, and I'm like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. This is definitely trial by fire.
I imagine that experience, though, as nerve-wracking as it can be, must be a pretty good shot of confidence going forward.
Yeah, I didn't have to dump any beer, which was great. And I got to learn the hard way, but I got to learn from a really world-renowned brewmaster that luckily I was only making 4 different kinds of beer, because if I had to come up with my own recipes back then on that scale, probably would have been awful. But I had a great teacher that really just walked me through every step of the way, even if he got to do it poolside in Mexico. But yeah, that experience, once you get that first lager on tap and it tastes just like the batch before it, that confidence there is just like, all right, I can make beer this way. I can do the job.
Where'd you head after that?
So I ended up in the Quad Cities, where I am currently. I had never even heard of the Quad Cities at that time.
I was going to say, for those without a map of the U.S. right now in front of them, can you give us the idea?
4 hours dead north of St. Louis, still on the Mississippi River. It's just the border of Illinois and Iowa instead of Illinois and Missouri. So it's Davenport, Iowa, Bettendorf, Iowa, Rock Island, Illinois, and Moline, Illinois make up the Quad Cities. It's where John Deere is. Their headquarters.
Wait, did you just name 3? You just named 3 cities, though, right? Or did I miss one?
Davenport, Bettendorf, Rock Island, Moline.
Sorry, gotcha. I missed the Bettendorf in there as well. Okay.
Yeah. So it's definitely it's a river town. It just totally reminds me of it's little St. Louis. Like, it kind of has the same. Nobody wants to cross the river, even though there's equal amount of things on both sides of the river. If you live in Illinois, you don't really go to Iowa much, and Iowa doesn't really come to Illinois much. So kind of strange, but we have equal amounts of breweries in this area. I think we're up to 17 breweries for such a small little area that nobody's heard of. So yeah, there's definitely a big craft beer community.
Is that what drew you to that area?
Yeah, I had at the time, my wife's family was from here, and she actually moved from here down to St. Louis when we got together, and when I was looking for a different opportunity, specifically one in American craft brewing and not making the same four lagers over and over again. We started looking into this area, and I came up for a weekend and just I never really spent any time up here, but just kind of popped around a couple breweries. And just the first two that I went to, I just, popped my head into the brewery and asked if there was a brewer around that I could talk to. And it's like, hey, I'm a brewer down in St. Louis and thinking about moving to the area. Just wanted to chat with you a little bit. And both two places that I went to first offered me jobs. They're just so hard up for experienced brewers. So that was kind of it. The second one that I went to ended up being the one that I made the move for. That was Bent River Brewing. They have a location in both Rock Island and in Moline.
Yeah.
So they have brew pub in Moline that opened in 1997, and then their production brewery in Rock Island that opened in the early 2000s. But they, that's the big brand that's in every bar, grocery store, gas station, and everything around here. So I was like, all right, well, if I can get into here, there's definitely room for growth and opportunity. And they got me in, and I was, I think they started me on like keg washing and stuff like everybody else. There, no special treatment for working at an international German lager brewery. I started from the bottom and worked the packaging line, and was an assistant brewer just cleaning tanks. And eventually we had some chats about, I made all these weird experimental beers as a home brewer that I won all kinds of awards for, mostly like weird vegetable beers and things. And they're like, well, we have this pilot system that nobody uses. If you ever want to just come in and do some brews on it, you're more than welcome. And so like after like a month of like using it constantly, they're like, all right, you're just going to be the R&D brewer. Like that's your position now. So they let me take over as the R&D brewer, coming up with all the new stuff. And at the same time, I was like, hey, your social media is awful. Like for as big of a brand as you guys are, like, you not have anybody to do this? And I'm like, no, like nobody, like we have some bartenders that make posts and stuff, but otherwise, we don't really do much social media. And I was like, well, I would like to be the marketing director. Like if I'm coming up with the new beers, I'd like to be able to like market them the way that I envision, like when I'm coming up with these recipes. Like they already have like placeholder names when I'm coming up with them. Like, let me just use those names and stuff. So I got to wear both of those hats, and I loved it. I was there for about a year and a half, and really enjoyed that role. But there's that fun thing, I think, in most bigger brewing communities like this, when there's so many breweries, not enough brewers to go around, that if one person gets another opportunity at a different brewery and they change hands, that becomes this kind of musical brewers, as we like to call it, where, all right, well, now they got that hole to fill. So who's going to move over there? And then from where that person came from, are they going to be able to promote from within, or are they going to have to find somebody else? And so usually when one brewer goes to a different brewery, it's 3 or 4 other brewers that are kind of moving around at the same time too, for a different or better opportunity.
Yeah.
So that kind of happened with me. I ended up at Geneseo Brewing in Geneseo, Illinois, which is right outside the Quad Cities, but it's like the closest brewery to my house, and got the opportunity as a head brewer. So went back to running a brewery all by myself, but this time got to do it on a 5-barrel system. So the smallest brewing system that I'd been on, other than just like the pilot system.
Yeah.
And I loved it because I got to do exactly what I did at Bent River, just always coming up with new things all the time. And I had free reign. Like we didn't even do any trials or anything. It's like, if it was good enough for me, it got to go on tap, and I got to name it whatever I wanted, promote whatever I wanted.
That's pretty cool.
And I loved it. It was in a small little community. It wasn't like in a big city or anything. So it's just the downtown, the only, at the time, like the only brewery in downtown. So it was pretty popular, and I had a lot of fun with it, and I got to completely run all the marketing and everything with it. And we ended up doubling production and sales in the first 6 months. And I had to bring on an assistant brewer, and she was actually my hairstylist at the time. And she was going to do it part-time as just like a fun thing to learn. And she liked craft beer. And then after about 6 months of being with me, she quit doing hair altogether, and she's been a brewer ever since. And she ended
That's
up taking
cool.
over as head brewer when I left too. But yeah, it was a great place to brew. Really enjoyed it. I don't think they brew there at all anymore. Pandemic kind of hurt a lot of things with
Yeah.
the brewing community around here. A lot of brewers left our community to go to other opportunities in other cities. We're kind of dead center between St. Louis, Chicago, Des Moines, Minneapolis, Madison. Anytime big jobs open up over there, any of our homegrown talent tend to get out of our area, which kind of isn't good for our community, but we've been making it work.
So I want to just go back to two things that you said just before we get on to what came next. Vegetable beers. So like, give me some examples of some of those beers that you were making back in the day on the pot. Yeah.
I did so many cucumber beers. Those were my thing for some reason. I think I made like one decent one as a home brewer, and it kind of just followed me. I won like a few home brewing awards for cucumber gozas and cucumber saisons. And yeah, one of my favorite, I like one of the only home brewing score sheets that I ever really kept from back then. Stan Hieronymus judged my cucumber saison in a home brewing competition in St. Louis, and his feedback was, "Oh, it's such a great saison. Your yeast character is really shy. It's like the malt balance is fantastic. Totally ruined it by putting cucumber in it."
Well, yeah. I mean, that's that's great feedback.
But yeah, we ended up when I worked at Bit River.
But it's what you wanted it to be.
Yeah, but I wanted to be the next, like I don't know, all the fun breweries that I, were following heavily on social media. The Chicago and St. Louis breweries that were coming up. Four Hands in St. Louis was a huge one. That was always putting, before all of the pastry stouts and smoothie sours and stuff. They were doing things like that back in, but before 2010 and things. And I just loved those breweries that just had, they didn't need rules. This is the Wild West. We just got to make whatever the next wild thing is, and striking gold on an experimental might be the next flagship for you. So yeah, when I was at Bent River, I think one of the first pilot things that we actually scaled up and did a big production run was my cucumber goza, and we named it Cuke Nukem, and it did really well. People like everybody gets kind of curious and a little put off when they see a vegetable beer, but that brewery was already doing a sweet potato ale instead of instead of a pumpkin beer for their fall seasonal. So they're already kind of trying to do things one off. So it kind of worked with being able to play around with vegetables and weird teas and things in this area. So that was, like I said, I think I just, found a weird home here, and now I can't really see me brewing in any other brewing community.
What was driving your creativity, right? I mean, going from Hofbrau, where you're making 3 beers, but you're really sort of dialed in to process and tradition and super clean flavors. I mean, there's creativity in that, although it's fairly limiting. But then to have cucumber saisons in the back of your mind, where have you drawn as a brewer your creativity from in the beers that you've created and then executed on?
I guess it's really more of my peers in the industry, and I think I got to start with being a little more experimental as a home brewer, and the homebrew club that I was in. I was in a homebrew club called the Firm on the Illinois side of St. Louis, and I think we've had like 8 professional brewers that have come out of that club since, and so either started breweries or became head brewers at big breweries like Urban Chestnut and things. And had a really good just homebrew community of brewers, and a lot of them were more into the traditional things. Where I was like, hey, this is homebrew. Like we would literally do whatever we want. So I would bring in the cucumber beers and the carrot beers, and and on that Illinois side, Scratch Brewing is about 2 hours south of there. So that was kind of a good weekend destination that a lot of us like to go. And they were putting, dead leaves and sumac and all kinds of weird flowers and mushrooms that they're foraging from their land, and extremely off the wall stuff. And I'm like, well, if they're doing that, I want to do that. And especially, I don't know, at the time, I think there were just under 90 breweries in the St. Louis area. And they were all having to compete with each other. They were all right on top of each other. I totally looked up to, especially we call them the 2010s, the breweries that opened in 2010 in St. Louis. So, Alpha Brewing, Four Hands, Perennial, Urban Chestnut, like they all opened between 2010 and 2011. And those are the huge brands that had to kind of come up with the next big thing to stay relevant. And they drove each other. And I was like, I want to be included in that group at one point, or in some kind of group like that, where we're all driving each other and we all got to work, all coming up with the next big thing. And from the outside looking in and being a consumer and just being a home brewer and things, and then even working at Hofbrauer, that was so different than the American craft brewing community. I thought it was a little more competitive than it really is. And once I actually got my foot in the door at American craft breweries, and started getting more involved, I'm like, wow, it really is a tight knit group. Like we really are good about not holding a lot of things close to the chest and helping each other out and sharing information. And that's, I think that's been the driving force in the evolution of craft beer, especially in the past 20 years. Of if we weren't so close as an industry and so open, and that wasn't, the ethos around our industry, that beer wouldn't be where it is now. We'd probably still all be making the same beers of the early 90s brew pubs and things, of the just standard pale ale, standard red ale, standard American stout, and just trying to, perfect those, but not really having many things to set our things, our brands and everything apart from each other. But I think the big thing was, all right, I know that brewery just did a beer with cucumbers or something, some strange ingredient. I want to try something like that. And being able to reach out to the breweries and brewers being so open. Yeah, I thinly slice them, I peel them, I put them in the secondary and let it sit for 3 days. Like people are super cool about telling you exactly how they do things.
Yeah.
I know a couple brewers that aren't, so open, but vast majority of brewers are like, yeah, this is the brand of coffee I use in my coffee stout. This is exactly how I do it. People are really cool about it, especially when it comes into the harder things to learn about, chemistry and things. I have a formal brewing education, but not a lot of brewers in my area do. But I have all the resources from all of the schools that I've been a part of. Anybody has any kind of water chemistry questions, if I can't think of it off the top of my head, I have the resources available. Anything like that, and just being part of, I'm heavily involved still with Master Brewers Association in St. Louis. I'm on the board there, and having those resources in St. Louis that, other brewers in my area of the Quad Cities, they don't know those guys. They're not a part of those kind of groups, and being able to have that larger network and feed off of them, it all boils down to, where my creativity comes from. I have a giant network of friends.
More with Charlie Cole in a moment, but first, this episode is brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company, America's leading non-alcoholic craft brewer. Give dry a try this January with Athletic Brewing's Near Beers. New Athletic customers can receive 20% off of their first order of 2 6-packs or more when they visit athleticbrewing.com and use the code AAB20 at checkout by March 31st, 2023. And for additional beer podcasts, search All About Beer on your podcast platform of choice and listen to Brewer, Beer Travelers, and the All About Beer podcast. And now back to my conversation with Charlie Cole of Blue Cat Brewing. So tell me about Blue Cat.
Oh, man. All right. Well, if anyone is unfamiliar with the Blue Cat Brew Pub, it is the second oldest operating, or was the second oldest operating brew pub in the state of Illinois. The only one older is Goose Island. So it opened in 1994 by Dan and Martha Cleveland. They were brother and sister. Dan had a chemistry background, and Martha was a very great chef. And the two ran it up until 2017 together. And Dan made all the beer. Martha ran all the restaurant, and it was just a staple for the Quad Cities, especially Rock Island, down here in the district, in the old bar district. And yeah, they had very unique beers. Dan was always traveling around the country. He went to CBC every year. I think from like the second or third year that they started having it, he was a staple there. He had a great palate. He was a judge for the Beverage Testing Institute for doing World Beer Championship.
Oh, BTI.
Yeah. So he kind of did his own thing. He was making a lot of different styles of beers than others were doing in the early 90s, and getting some credit in the Midwest for that. And yeah, they ran it for a very long time. And in 2017, they decided to retire. Things had kind of slowed down. He didn't really make too many new beers. He's still making the same beers that he came up with in the early 90s or the mid 90s, early 2000s. And the craft beer community was blowing up around here. And at that
world
time,
can
I
pass
think
you by.
they had about 5 breweries open in a single year, right around the time that he chose to retire. I think that had a big thing to do with it. And he was just ready for retirement. And a partnership group that came in, just investor group that owned several other things in the area, construction company, an accounting firm, a bowling alley. They're just investors, and they came in and they bought it from them and thought that it was just going to be this, turnkey thing, super easy to run a brewery. And didn't do too well for them for 2 years. They tried to rebrand and became a different name for a little while, and that just hurt it even worse. And people thought that the place closed, even though it didn't. It just was very, very unpopular. They didn't have a brewer, so they had to. They were contract getting their beer in for a while. I was actually brewing it when I was at Bent River, and they weren't doing too well. They put an ad out on Indeed and for a brewer, and I was like, well, I'll interview and I'll be able to point somebody in the right direction. I'm going to see what they're looking for. I never really looked at their equipment and stuff, and I was like, I'll go in and I'll do an interview and find out what kind of brewer that they're at would fit well in here, because I just very involved in the community up here. And I'm like, I'm sure there's an assistant brewer at one of these bigger brewers that's probably ready to take that leap and become a head brewer somewhere. So I interviewed, no intention of taking the job or getting the job or anything. But the more I talked to them and figured out, they needed help. They needed a GM. They definitely needed somebody that worked in a brewery before. None of their staff had ever even worked in a brewery. They just treated it like a restaurant. And I'm like, this place has so much history. And people just love this place so much, and it's really, really died down. Like, it just so much opportunity here to revive this legacy brand and bring it back. So at the time, I was just post-pandemic. I had just done a ton of brewing education, and was kind of back and I think I was working at like 3 breweries at the same time, just part-time, helping people recover from the pandemic.
Yikes.
I went back to Hofbrau, where I'd do that once a month and just go in and clean their equipment just so that it wasn't sitting, stagnant. And I was working up at a brewery just south of Rockford. I was working part-time at a brewery in East Moline, and was just kind of wasn't too deep into anything. And I had just finished business of craft beer program through University of Vermont, and then business craft beer program through San Diego State. And I was like, my next venture is opening up my own brewery. I've been at four or five different breweries by this point, been a head brewer at several of them. I've worked on every scale of brewing system at this point. And my next leap is to have my own brewery. That's my next step. And so I had a business plan that I had put together from the programs that I was in, and was kind of looking at different spaces and looking at different partners that, could be helpful and getting in it with me. And this opportunity came up, and I got to tour the place, and I was like, man, this place is massive. It is so big, and the brewing equipment's it's outdated, but it's got charm. And, updating just a couple of things, this would be way cheaper than building out my own brewery.
Yeah.
There's a lot I could do with this. And the brand is just, just so known in this area that I could give it a facelift and bring back the Blue Cat and just kind of update it and make it cool again, and brew their award-winning beers, but then also brew some of my crazier things and kind of keep that balance on the tap list. And just saw a great opportunity there. And the partners that owned it were like, yes, absolutely. So I put in some money, and we got all new fermenters and new hot liquor tank, new glycol chiller, did a bunch of updates in the brewery, kept the same old brew house from 1993. It's a specific system. Yeah. I think the serial number is 360 something, like
okay,
one of the first specific systems, and works like a charm. It's one of the best like workhorse brew houses that I've worked on brand new ones that don't give me the efficiency that this old beast does. So wonderful brew system. And I actually got to sit down with Dan Cleveland, the original brewmaster, and gave me all of the old recipes, gave me all the old brew sheets. We sat down, and there's a brewery right up the hill from me called Radical Effect Brewing. And that's his little watering hole that he hangs out at. So go up there and drink some wit beers. The man loves some wit beers, and he just, we'd sit down one recipe at a time and go through, all right, well, what was the big bad dog? How do we recreate that? Like how, the ingredients aren't the same like they were in the 90s. Everything's more modified. There's so many more brands. Like why did you use this malt? Why did you use this amount of this malt? If I switch up the yeast, are you going to be mad at me? Like things like that.
But I mean, that is the nature of progress though. And I think a lot of those breweries that, in the 90s when, we used it because that's what was available to a brewery our size, and that just sort of adapted, but then didn't update over time. Those are some of the ones that fell on harder times, especially, when they could see dwindling sales or customers in the tap room.
Absolutely. And this place, in the 90s, it was a great success story of one of the earlier breweries. But this whole area, they call it the district down here. Every storefront was in business. There were several nightclubs and bars and restaurants just over a several block area. Today, we're one of three businesses open in this whole area. We just closed on New Year's Eve, so now there are two operating businesses in this once thriving downtown area. And that's pandemic had a lot to do with it, but it was already dying down before that. Just again, progress, like the newer developing areas were popping up on both sides of the river that were becoming, they're cleaner, they're newer, they're new restaurants, new styles of foods, new culture, and it just kind of moved away from this area. So it's definitely kind of a ghost town down here.
So you jumped ahead to a little bit of the spoiler, but closing at the end of 2022, so just about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, just about 3 weeks ago. It was kind of I didn't really get a good amount of time in here. I think I was only partial owner and operator for 14 or 15 months. We did a great a great thing going, which is the super disappointing thing of having to close the doors. There's so many factors in owning and operating a business that until you really get into it, especially at this scale, I feel like that it can't be done by one person. And I was really trying to wear all the hats, and spread myself too thin.
Was that by need or necessity?
Both.
Like something that you needed to prove, or yeah.
I don't know if it was, a really approving thing, except for the fact that I just had so much experience in so many aspects of a brewery that I knew how to do most things. And it's so hard to find people that can do those things, or to train people to do those things when you're doing so many other things at the same time. And I think that was the big thing with it is, I just couldn't find the right people. I think I went through 2 chefs in the first couple of months. The first one was terrible. He ended up going to jail like 2 days after he started, but after we had already changed the menu and doing all this stuff, and
like sentenced, like he knew this was coming.
No,
okay.
Just I don't I'm not going to get into his personal
no, you don't
stuff,
have to.
But yeah, it was, we just made this big investment into him of, changing, coming up with a brand new menu, ordering all this food, hiring new people and getting them in for training shifts. And then my stroke of luck, he ends up getting picked up, and he's in jail for the next 20 years. So then we, had to take that next step back again and, find another chef. Luckily, I found a really, really great chef, and it was somebody that I had worked with at Bent River. So he kind of knew, what would be successful for a brew pub, and how to incorporate, a good menu that showcased the beer and showcased the food equally, that it wasn't a restaurant that made beer and it wasn't a brewery that, just served some bar food. It was a very, very much an actual brew pub where they coexisted and balanced each other out really well. And he was fantastic, but he recently got an opportunity to open up his own business. So you definitely can't fault a guy for, making that jump. I made the same jump myself. Yeah. I want everybody to do that. If you think you got, the skill to do it, get that experience. So he ended up leaving about a month ago and started his own deal, but I just had nobody else in the kitchen could step up and fulfill that role. It's so much more than just, cooking food. It's all the inventory and food cost and scheduling and training employees and prep work and cleaning and all of this stuff that nobody else on staff back there could really step up with. And I've literally never worked in a restaurant. I've worked in brew pubs, but I've never really worked on the front of house side. So this was all brand new to me. I thought I was just going to be able to hire a chef and hire a front of house manager, and I was just going to do my thing in the brewery, and everything was going to work out. And I went through 4 front of house managers in the first year. And it felt like as soon as you train somebody, they're either, the amount of job opportunities that are available right now. If something else comes up, somebody's paying more for less work, people are going to take it. So I had 2 people leave for that reason. And then I had one person that, you spend all this time training them, and then they still can't really fulfill the job that needs to be done. So do you spend more time really hammering into them and being like, hey, this really needs to get done. This is really have to do the whole job, not just the parts that you want to do. Or do you, look for another person, or do you just do it yourself because you already wasted so much time and money putting into people? And in the end, that's kind of what happened. We couldn't start over again with another person of investing in them and having them either leave or fall short. Like I said, when it was Blue Cat of the early 90s and 2000s and things, there were 2 partners. There was one that ran the brewery and one that ran the restaurant, and they had their roles, and they were both passionate and great at what they did. And that's why it was so successful for so long.
And that I was going to ask you about that, about having two people, because as you've now said, and I think, some folks have learned this the hard way, and some have been, eventually successful, although walking through glass at the, to get to that point. Running a brewery, running a restaurant, even if they are under the same roof, are two totally different scenarios. So I imagine now, as you're talking to people who are in a position like you were 2 years ago, that are thinking about either taking something over or starting their own brewery with a food component, I imagine the advice is make sure you have somebody who knows the food component.
Yeah, don't try to do it yourself. That is the biggest piece of advice. Don't expect to hire somebody to do the full job that you're expecting. Like you're going to need a partner that has not just that experience, but that passion to, put in the 70 hours a week and really care about labor cost and food cost and waste and all of those things, because it's so hard to hire somebody that checks all of those boxes. You really have to have somebody that has their skin in the game. I had mentioned that to my partners several months ago when I just kind of got spread too thin. I was like, guys, like if one of you doesn't have like a son or daughter that wants to run the restaurant side of this, then like I'm going to need one of you or both of you or some of both of your ownership. You guys got to sell something and get a partner. I need a partner in here that is going to operate with me. I can't operate this entire place by myself. You can't. I don't need investors. Like this place isn't gonna run itself with just money. Like it needs the right people. So that's been the big thing too. We started putting the word out a couple months ago, even before the chef left, about, looking for a restaurant partner. There's so many great food trucks and pop-ups and things that happen in this area. It's a great food area. It's a lot of culture here, a lot of different kinds of food that thrive here. We have several universities and stuff in this area, and it just brings all the culture with it. And I'm like, there's got to be like one of those food trucks or just somebody that's been cooking at home that is ready to make that leap. And this is such a great opportunity because we're not hurting for customers at all. We're selling a ton of beer. We have great front of house staff. We have great back of house staff, but without those leaders in those positions, it has to be multiple people. It can't just be me. And especially if I don't know what I'm doing, I'm winging it. I've been winging it for 15 months, being like, all right, I guess this is how you run a restaurant. I've never even worked in one, but can't be too hard right now. It's super hard. So
I'm famous last words. Yeah.
I'm in so many like brewery and planning Facebook groups and things, because they're groups that I was in, but before I started my own brewery or got my own brewery, that I'm still in. So I still see people making posts every day of, how do you approach food in your brewery, or can I just open up a tap room? And it's different for everybody. There are absolutely breweries that can operate without food. It's really hard. I know that for a fact, that it's, if you're trying to do a big enough scale with just having a small craft brewery and just having a tap room, it's hard. It's rough. I know I got one right down the street from us, Wake Brewing, also in Rock Island, and they have very small tap room, very small brew system. They pump out a ton of beer. They make great beer. They market it super well. But they had to start their own food truck. They didn't have any room in their building to add food. And they knew not having food after they had been open for almost 3 years was something that they absolutely needed to fulfill, and to rely on other people's food trucks and things wasn't going to work. So, they ended up starting their own food truck because they didn't have the space. But food at this point, I mean, at least in our brewing community, is a necessity. And if you don't have that dual skill set of running a restaurant and running a brewery, and there are definitely people that can do it. I know them. And I have so much respect for people that can do both. But yeah, if you can't, don't try to wing it. That's my advice.
Yeah. So you have to make this necessary, and then there's some infrastructure problems that happened at the building as well. that I saw some posts about. But you had to make this, terrible decision to have to, at the end of the year, say, okay, like this is, we can't keep the doors open. We can't, keep the lights on. Although you've kept the beer flowing. It seems like what you've had in the tanks for the last little bit.
Yeah. A lot of my coworkers, I say coworkers because I worked alongside them, not just at this brewery. Like much of our staff came from other breweries. If there were people that I worked with there, that whenever I opened up my brewery, they were like, "Oh yeah, we want to do whatever you're doing. Like we want to work at your place." So most of my staff I had worked with at other breweries and stuff. So I, still consider them my friends. It's really hard to have that, balance of being the boss and considering your employees, your friends and things, but I absolutely have and still do. I've been very open with them about how things are going and what was going on. And, I'm like, I'm looking for a restaurant partner. Like, that's what's going to take to keep this place rolling. So like, put your feelers out there. Like, I'm not saying we're closing. I'm just saying like, that's the next step for us to keep operating. And so just kept that, transparency through every step of the way. When the chef left, I had a emergency employee meeting, called everybody in. I was like, "Hey, chef left. So like, we don't have food now. And if we don't have food, we don't have bar service. So until, I can find somebody to run the kitchen, we're going to have to close operations, and it might be temporary. It might be permanent. It's all going to depend on how long it takes to get the right person in here and everything. But having that transparency with the staff, like I knew that was definitely the right thing to do. But, from everyone that was there, they're all like, yeah, we obviously need to find other jobs and do our best, but let us know when you reopen. And, if and when we reopen, then, I know that a lot of them would come back. Several of them would come back. Just, I think we did it the right way, as opposed to just putting a piece of paper on the door that says we're, closed, and they find out that way, or from a Facebook post or a text message or anything like that. Like, I wanted to be very clear face to face of like every step of the way, what was going on. And I think they all understood. They all, they knew how thin I was, being spread, and felt for me and everything. And a lot of them were doing more than what their job expectation was, to help me out. And, I appreciate all of them so much for what they put into it, because a lot of them did a lot more than what was their job to keep this place running. But yeah, it was definitely a rough thing that we didn't want to do. And we were hoping, let's get a couple months, put the feelers out there. I do a lot with our local media and things, and, put it all out there that we are looking for a restaurant partner. And I've met with, half a dozen people. I've met with maybe 2 or 3 that were more potential, and we'll see where those go. And, hopefully we can bring it back. But we want to just put everything out there. And with the community, this is, such a staple place. I have so many stories of customers coming in and, that told me how appreciative they were that we revived the Blue Cat brand and brought it back. And, people saying, I had my first date with my wife in that booth over there. And, we've been married for 15 years and have 2 kids, and we've had both of their baby showers in your private event space upstairs. Yeah. All those stories are great. And people being like, this is where I found craft beer. Like in 1994, I had my first stout, and it was the first stout that I ever had. And I love craft beer now. And it all started here. And I'm like, wow, like those are, I didn't grow up in this community. I just kind of transplanted into it. So, I know people love this place, and I wanted to be as respectful with my staff as I was with the community, and being like, I'm going to do whatever I can, and we're just going to limp through what we're doing. And I'm on the hunt for somebody that has the same passion that I do about beer, that, if they have it about food, come in and let's partner up. Let's keep this place alive. And that's where we're at. That's up until
that's
today.
The goal.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the goal, to keep it going. So it's not a at this point a permanently closed situation.
No, it's, we haven't completely thrown in the towel, where it's it feels like it every day. I'm like, man, it's we did actually have to close for better part of almost 2 weeks. We, like you said, some infrastructure damage. We had perfect storm over the Christmas vacation weekend. I let all the staff take Christmas Eve and Christmas Day off, and we had 2 furnaces go out. We had negative 36 wind chill, and caused 2 of our furnaces to go out, which caused 4 burst pipes in that were touching exterior walls. So I came in Monday morning, and there's a river just flowing down our alley, and it was where the sump pumps drain out of the building too. And I'm like, oh no. So yeah, I came inside, and our basement had upward, in some areas of the lower parts of the basement had 6 to 8 inches of water, and there's just a waterfall flowing through the walls into the basement. And I'm like, wow, just add it on, just pile it up. It's one more thing that my staff thought they were going to have another week and a half of being able to limp through and make some money after the holidays, and they didn't get that. So we ended up, after we were able to clean up and fix the damage and everything, I ended up just bartending for a couple of days, because most of them had already have found new jobs and stuff in that time. And so I just bartended for a few days and kind of told people, this might be the last chance to get the beer and come in and tip heavy. I'm not taking any of the tips. I'm splitting it with all my staff, front and back of house. I split it with, and everybody got a little chunk of money to at least help them out a little bit. But it was it was rough.
Hope it gets better. I mean, it seems like that's the only place to go is up at this point, but
right. Yeah. It's staying positive, it's the big thing. And, there's definitely other opportunities for me out there. I'm not ever going to be hurting for a brewing job, I don't think. So it's just rough. I don't want to see this brand disappear is the big thing. And I've put so much of myself into this place, and I know any brewery owner will tell you the same thing, that it's a part of them at any point. Even if they walk away from it, it's going to carry with them of what they put into it. I'm sitting in this building right now, it's completely empty and silent, and I don't want to see it sit like this. I don't want to see those fermenters sit empty, and the beer not flowing on the taps. I want to see people enjoying a pint of Arkham Stout and a Big Bad Dog, and watching the football game and hanging out. That's what this place is here for.
I've been asking folks on the show for a long while now, the green door question, which I don't know if you're familiar with the TV show The Good Place, but in the final season of that show, they introduce a concept of a green door that you can walk through and be anywhere at any time, basically doing whatever you want. And so if there was such a door on our plane of existence and this conversation ended, and you could walk through it and be at any pub or any brewery anywhere in the world, where would you want to go? Who would you want to be with? And what would you like to be drinking?
Oh man. Several things just popped into my head, just hearing that, but I think the brewery I'd want to be at would be the Schlafly Tap Room in St. Louis, and I'd be wanting to have a beer with Stephen Hale. He was the head brewer there from when they started. He just recently retired last year, and he was such a huge mentor to me. I still talk to him. I think he's sailing around the world right now in a sailboat, but talk to him almost once a week. I took his board seat on Master Brewers St. Louis district. And so yeah, he still keeps in touch with what I'm doing with Master Brewers and everything. But every time that I've had a chance to sit down and have a Schlafly Pale Ale or Schlafly Blonde or any of his beers and have a conversation, it always goes deeper than beer. We always started with beer, and it always got deeper than beer. And always loved having those conversations with him. And definitely, that's where I'd be for sure.
I love it. Hey, Charlie, thanks for taking the time and being on the show this week and for giving us a peek into some of the real life travails of owning a small brewery in America these days.
Absolutely. Appreciate it, John.
A reminder to take some time for mental health breaks. It's okay not to be okay, and the stresses of the world are not yours alone to shoulder. Take time for yourself and reach out to those who love you whenever you need support. A reminder to go visit allaboutbeer.com. You can check out the podcast page, the merch page. You can read great new content as well as the archives going back to 1979. Questions, comments, concerns, guest suggestions, let me know by emailing me. It's John Hall, JOHNHOLL @allaboutbeer.com, or you can tell me on Twitter @John_Hall. You can also follow All About Beer on social media simply by going to @AllAboutBeer on whatever social platform you're looking for. If you're interested in supporting journalism in the beer space, you can email us at info@allaboutbeer.com or go to patreon.com/allaboutbeer. Speaking of that, today's episode was sponsored by Athletic Brewing Company, America's leading non-alcoholic craft brewer. Now you can drink great tasting brews all month long without feeling hungover. Whether you're giving dry a try for a few days or the whole month of January, Athletic Brewing's near beers have you covered. New Athletic customers can receive 20% off of their first order of 2 6-packs or more when they visit athleticbrewing.com and use the code AAB20 at checkout by March 31st, 2023. And again, you can learn about advertising by emailing us at info@allaboutbeer.com. Don't forget, All About Beer has a podcast channel now. Search and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. As for this show, Nate Schweber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.